how many of you actually know we've actually been running some since October already, and they will be coming now regularly, along with a topic of the month that's working out of the Staff Development Center, which is just on the other side of the corridor. Perhaps I can persuade you then to visit the center before you go back to your office. The topic of the month is stress. And isn't it appropriate for this time of year where there doesn't seem to be enough hours in the day to bake the cake clothes, to get the presents, to hide the presents, to calm down the children, etc., etc. Well, we're talking about work-related stress too. How many of you are under pressures with deadlines? This has to be done by the end of the year. People in procurement, I'm sure, are pulling their hair out, etc., etc. So we know about stress because we live it. Some of us live it every day. But how do you deal with that stress? We have at least two very qualified people to address the issue and perhaps give us some pointers as how to get around and how to cope, how to deal with the stress. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce, although she hardly needs an introduction, Dr. Binta Ahmed from our VIC Medical Service, who I know over several years as quite caring and quite, how should I say, if you have an issue or something, she really takes the time to discuss it with you, and that's very valuable because time, again, is of the essence to some issues. Dr. Ahmed, Senior Medical Officer from the VIC, and somebody that many of you maybe might not know about, particularly if you're new. Did you know we have a staff counselor? We're not on the Enterprise, but she happens to be Patience Gebauer, and she's not just responsible for people at the IAEA, but she also looks after people in the other Vienna-based organizations like,
you're noticing.
Okay, so that's quite a lot of people to be looking after. So she's quite familiar with the kinds of issues and the kinds of things that staff are up against. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to ask Dr. Ahmed, please, the floor is yours to address stress at work. Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. As you said, it's just a brief talk. I have to say that presentation which I'm starting to because that time may not be enough for us to go through everything that we have prepared. So we do try to skip some slides, but they are copies for you to look through in your own time. And the aim of this talk is just to give you, just a kind of introduction, and it's an awareness talk. So stress management will take at least half a day. And to do justice to it, we need a course for about 1.5 days in order to do proper stress management, to actually equip you with techniques of dealing with stress and so on. So this will just be a sort of concept of stress, which we all know and we deal with every day. So this is briefly what we are going to go through today. That's what stress is, although it hardly needs any definition, but we would like to define things. And then what it does to, how common it is, and I'm sure all of you agree that it's extremely common. What it does to the person and to the organization, and what are the sources of work-related stress, and how do we recognize it, what do we do about it, and then if really things become very bad, what are the resources available to deal with consequences?
Excuse me, Dr. Ahmed, with your kind permission, may I remove the monitor, which is perhaps distracting, and if you'd like to be sitting down, as you're going through all this.
Thank you. So if you can't hear me properly, do please give a shout, because sometimes my voice is too low. So if you can't hear me, please let me know. So the definition of stress, technically, according to the Health and Safety Executive, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Body for the United Kingdom, is defined as stress, where the demands of work exceed a person's ability to cope. So this is the sort of official definition of work-related stress. But there's a definition that is closer to my heart, because this one equips you to actually deal with the stress, because it's more a perception of how you feel about what those work demands are and about your ability to cope. Sometimes you can actually cope better than you think you can. Sometimes the demands are more than you think they are, and then you cope very well because you minimize the demand. Sometimes they are a little bit less than you think they are, and then that gives you stress. So the perception is very important. And there are two sayings which I like very much, which was a very, very long time ago, that actually the people are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. That's, I think, an important thing to keep in mind when you find yourself reacting one way or the other, especially negatively to situations or to things. And then, of course, your opinion, which is a way of Marcus Aurelius, famous Marcus Aurelius, that's the one and only. So, stress is generally perceived as a negative thing these days, so it's a word that is used everywhere in the media, by people, by ourselves, every single day. And even by school children, it's a popular word. I'm stressed and I'm under stress and so on. But is there actually, is it always bad? Is there anything as good stress? Yes, indeed there is. And we do need a little bit of stress actually in order to achieve and to perform. It's kind of it can be a positive driving force. And maybe one can call that a challenge, but of course the challenge can be excessive or demanding, but this is all semantics. The important thing is there is such a thing as a good stress, and we need a little bit of stress actually in order to do well. And this is the sort of official term of what it is when you have pressure and stress, pressure, stress, challenge, and so on. You do need a little bit more in order to be at your best, to be creative, to be productive, and so on. And if you have too little, you get what we call rust out. You're all familiar with the term burnout, but there's also another term which is not important, popularly, which is called rust out. If you just have too little, there's too little demand on you, too little pressure on you. And I have seen that even in offices where people are moved from one job to the other and they find there's just no challenge, there's nothing. And they actually fall ill because of that. And then they get everything from just simple frustration right up to depression and a state of rust. Now, how common is stress? It's extremely common, and according to surveys which were done in many, many countries, including the countries of the EU, different large organizations in the United States, from Scandinavian countries and so on average, anything between 20 and 50%, that means 1 in 2 people at work affected by stress. So in this case, we are not talking of just a positive stress, but stress that is not good enough, that is bad enough to actually cause them some degree of ill health. So that's what we're talking about. And it is actually a very common cause of work-related illness. It's second only to musculoskeletal disorders in causing absence from work. The only problems with back, joints, and things like that are more common than stress as a common cause of work-related absence. And then the people who are affected most in some surveys, there's only one survey I have seen where it showed a slight preponderance of men in people who are affected by stress. But majority of data is that women actually bear the greatest burden of work-related stress. And in particular, women who work full-time and have children under the age of 13 are the most affected.
Dr. Ahmed, also some of the research shows that it's because men still do not feel as comfortable talking about how they're feeling and do not report the stress until it gets to an extreme level.
Exactly. So that's probably one of the reasons that their figures don't go up. Women are much more ready to talk about their problems and to say that they are affected by stress. So what is the impact? What does stress do to us? I think we all know, and I'm sure if we had time and we took your opinions, you would actually compile the whole list of stress-related illnesses and problems. But time doesn't permit me to ask you your opinion, so you'd have to bear with me telling you what it is. But I'm sure you agree with me on those reasons. That actually, in summary, one can say it affects everybody. So not only the person who is affected by stress, but their family. You could trace, only cases of ill health in work age population to stress. So that's a very huge figure. And this is a cost in the EU, 40 billion, according to the latest figures which I was able to lay my hands on. And it results in lost work days of 11.4 million. Lost work days in the year 2009. It's a huge cost. And earlier surveys then from the year 2000 onwards showed that although work-related stress is second to musculoskeletal illnesses, it does account for longer periods of lost work days. And the average in one survey was about 25 days per annum per worker. Whereas the other illnesses, all other illnesses, the average was 6 days per annum per worker. Whereas for stress-related illnesses, stress, anxiety, and so on, 25 days. And in another survey, I think the more recent figure from the UK came up with about 30.5 days per worker due to stress-related illness per annum. So although it's not the commonest, it actually accounts for the longest periods of absences. And I used to have a slide on this presentation which showed the reasons for disability in the UN, according to the UN Joint Pension Fund figures. And the psychiatric and mental problems are by far the most predominant cause of people actually having to stop work and using it in common with many other organizations.
What was it, 43.2%?
That's right. By far, it's huge. Huge figure. So it does have a very high impact, and that's why we need to be aware of what it is, and we need to minimize the effect on us, and then that would have a positive effect on the organization, but not just ourselves, but whatever your position, whether you are just an employee, you have nobody under you, you are a supervisor, you are a manager, and at the end of the day, the whole organization itself needs to be aware of this in order to reduce the financial and human costs of stress and stress-related illness. So what are the causes then of work-related stress? It actually, you can summarize it as the interaction between the worker and the conditions of work. And conditions of work are more than just the physical conditions, everything. The environment, the office, the job, the people, that's what conditions mean. And the stress by itself would not have been such a big problem if it didn't lead to ill health, but it can lead to both physical and mental problems, and that's why it's a problem that needs to be addressed. So there's a very long list which you can go through in your handouts, which time will not permit us to go through every item individually, but these are the most significant sources of stress that have been found in sort of detailed studies. And work overload. A lot of people can cope with work overload. These factors are not sort of exclusive. Sometimes there's a combination, and sometimes they accentuate or potentiate each other when they are present in movement.
Yeah, I was just going to say, especially with work overload, it's more the combination of there's a lack of recognition and the lack of appreciation and the work overload, because a lot of people really do thrive off of work, and that's fine, but whenever it's not appreciated and it's not acknowledged and it's unfairly delegated and these kind of the social issues, that's whenever it becomes too much and it becomes too stressful.
In fact, I had someone say to me very recently, if only we get some acknowledgement. We are not all looking for appreciation, but at least acknowledgement. It will be nice to have some acknowledgement. That will enable me to take that extra step. But I like to work, I enjoy my work, but I don't even get any acknowledgement for what I do. So that is one of the reasons. And eventually a person like this would become gradually frustrated, demotivated, and can easily fall ill. And that is one of the things, is that poor relationship not only with the supervisor, but also the relationship with the supervisor is very important. That's why if you are a supervisor, it is very important to recognize some of these sources and causes of stress among the staff and try to address them as best you can. Supervisors themselves do have supervisors. Sometimes they are under stress and they become sandwiched, between their own problems and their staff.
Yeah, because the UN research that they've done before was P4s and P5s actually have the most amount of stress in the organization, in the UN organization.
So there are other factors which might be related to the job, and this is very interesting. When you are doing sort of a monotonous job that is not challenging mentally, that can be a very important source of stress. And then if the job, of course, is interfering with the person's personal life, it's a very powerful stressor as well. And luckily for us in the UN, this will not apply, but it does oblige to give you a comprehensive and good. But when your job involves physical danger, it doesn't apply to most of us, because a lot of people do office work, but there are groups of workers whose jobs actually can imply some kind of physical danger. People who work manually, or people who work with toxic substances, and so on and so forth. And then there are a lot of others. This is sort of too detailed a slide, so I would ask you to please take time and study the things in your handout. But you will all recognize and sort of appreciate some of these points. If you have, for example, in an organization where people are not participating, when people are not part of the decision-making process, whatever the results of decision that have come to, whenever that's imposed on people, that can be a cause of stress, especially if it also involves change. So that can be a very powerful source of stress for people. Or if there's a dictatorial hierarchy in an organization, you do have to have a hierarchy, but it should not be dictatorial. If there is, then that can be powerful. And then, if people are not quite sure what is expected of them, that is also a really powerful source of stress for a lot of people. And then lack of job security. In fact, one survey shows that people with temporary contracts on the one hand, and but on the other hand, people with permanent contracts could have more stress than any other type of contract, like fixed term and things like that. Because with people with permanent contracts, I think I was not very clear as to the exact reasons why they had that. But the people with temporary contracts, it's obvious when you have job insecurity and you're not quite sure. And then in these days of economic downturn, there's a spike, there's a big increase in work-related stress outside because of that. And then lack of progress and so on. And then inadequate feedback on performance is very important for people to get feedback, whether it is, if it's positive, it's very encouraging. If it's negative, if it's not positive, it should be put in a constructive way so that they can actually improve. They should not feel criticized or underappreciated or condemned or something like that. Without and then there are a lot of other things. Bullying and mobbing is a very powerful cause of work-related stress and ill health. And then lack of support. So, and these are some of the most important or the most powerful stresses that have been found as far as work is concerned. Change, and then lack of control over what you do, over your workload, or over decisions. So these are of all the factors that we have listed, these are some of the most powerful ones. But then if a person is not simply, a work person, we also have lives outside. And although you can mentally separate the two, but physically and in reality, you cannot separate the two. The person who has, for example, a teenage son who is giving trouble is the same person who will have to come at his desk and be expected to sit down and perform. Or a young mother with a baby who has some health problem, who has a cold, and she's worried whether they have pneumonia or something, leaves them off at the nanny or at the nursery, is the same person who is expected to come and put in a full day's work. So one cannot separate, the personal life from the work life. One definitely, most people do make an effort to, but we have to realize, especially supervisors have to realize that if there are things going on in the lives of their staff members, that can also affect their performance. And what they need is an understanding, support, and consideration. And most people can juggle work and life, they've always done that. But if there's no support or no understanding, that's where problems arise. So all these sorts of things, I don't know what I want to add on this.
Yeah, it's more the balance. It's more about remembering the balance, because one is not more important. Well, actually, I do feel that family is more important, but you also have to support you, and so you have to think of ways that you can take care of yourself as you're trying to juggle both sides.
And then, in actual fact, it's not only work problems that cause mental health problems. Mental health problems are pretty common in the society, and the chances are that a significant percentage of work age people would also have some kind of mental health problem. Serious ones are rare. Serious mental health problems like schizophrenia and so on are rare. And you would hardly find those people in regular work anyway. But mild, minor mental health problems like anxiety, mild depression and so on, those are pretty common. And so there would be a significant percentage of us who would be affected by this. And if you then have work-related stress, it's very easy then for them to fall ill more easily and get more problems.
And those go unaddressed. Those are mental health problems that go unaddressed. Because, and especially so often whenever people are suffering from depression or anxiety, we try and hide that, not realizing that this is a chemical imbalance and that many people go through this. It's just a serotonin, depletion. It's not a big deal. However, most of us, we're raised with a society of, I'm not doing so well, so you try and hide it rather than talking about it or really seeking help. And if you know that's how you feel, think your colleagues also. and then whenever you multiply it by the different cultures, because so many people do not feel so comfortable talking about what's going on with them personally, and they try and hide it, and then the stress and the daily stress of work just makes it much stronger, and that's why sometimes you can have really bad days, and then you're thinking, oh, your colleague's reaction was really strong, and you're like, why is that? And they could be going through their own problem, and they're not sharing it with you. And this is not a mental health problem. This is a physical, but it does come out in mental health. There's also women between what is it now, age 39 to 55, menopause. Menopause, it does really horrible things to you, where you doubt yourself, you lose your confidence. It's hormones. It's an imbalance of the hormones. But so many women report it's like they feel like they're losing their minds, and it really is just hormone imbalance. And also men have that too. Menopause is also, men are also affected, and so many men don't recognize it like women didn't with menopause, but men also go through the same hormonal changes. It's just not as strong, and so we don't talk about it. But also men between 39 and 55, if they're what we used to call the midlife crisis, is actually just the menopause for men, and it's just hormonal changes, which it will level out, I promise.
It was actually given a name, the men's menopause, but it has not yet come into popularity, and that's the andropause.
Yeah.
So it's very important then to recognize that when people have a pre-existing mental health problem, that could exacerbate any effects that any stress at work may have on them. So, it's very hard to separate the problem. So, how do we recognize stress? Sometimes it's very obvious. Nobody has to tell you that you are under stress, or the person next to you is under stress, because it's very clear. But sometimes it is not that certain. So you have to look out for certain changes, certain things in this, and you feel that even like emotional things. If you're saying sometimes you're puzzled at the way somebody reacts at something that is totally minor and inconsequential, and then you get such a very strong reaction, and you step back and say, where's that coming from? So it's maybe just the emotional reaction. And then there could be mental, somebody is obviously changing the personality, they're depressed, or behavior, or sometimes even physical. So there's a long list of all the symptoms and signs and so on. This is a very busy story, so it can be the individual things. But we have all been affected to some degree or the other by one of these symptoms when we are under a state of great anxiety or stress, whether at work or outside. And they can range from things that affect the mind and the body and so on. Even this morning I had somebody who was having stomach cramps because of work-related stress, and the situation is the person was bypassed for a promotion, and the supervisor handled it extremely badly, in my opinion. And the person has been having these problems, sleep disturbance, stomach disturbance, and so on. And then there are lots of other things that can happen also, emotionally, angry outbursts, being easily irritable, being restless, and so on. And then eating disorders, people either eat more or less, people have different reactions. Quite often some people do comfort eating, while others just go off their food, and they have problems. And one of the more serious ones is there could be an increase in the use of alcohol because it's a kind of self-medication. People take it to feel better, to feel more relaxed, and a few might fall insidiously into dangerous alcohol use without realizing it. And then, of course, then it can lead to serious sexual responsibility. These things do not come all at once. It may come insidiously. One could have a few or more of this in any combination. It is just sort of the whole picture of possible consequences on the mind and the body of work-related stress, ill health. And then you have really physical things like that. These are delayed reactions. Sometimes it is only after the stressful event or after a series of stressful events when things are already over that people begin to have problems. We had a situation some years ago of someone who went through this very typical delayed reaction. They were subjected to a very heavy workload, a little bit above their level. And after 9 months or so, went back to their normal job. And then the floodgates opened with all these problems, and they had to go to hospital. So they were actually coping and doing well, but just when the pressure was released, then the floodgates or all these symptoms opened. The person had to have all kinds of invasive and intrusive tests like colonoscopy and endoscopy and heart tests because the symptoms showed as if there was a serious physical problem. Then eventually when nothing was found, then the penny dropped on the doctors and asked that this is actually a delayed stress response.
And that actually happens very often here, is that people will go through a period where they work so hard, and then whenever they go through the time whenever it's finally coming out, they're reacting to the stress. Their managers and their colleagues don't understand. They're like, but no, we worked on this really intense project, and now suddenly, we're not doing much, and this person is calling in sick, and then it's not family things well. But it really is. It's a delayed reaction, and it really happens much more often around here. Not to such an extreme amount, but a lot here because we do get so busy with these deadlines, and it must be done. It's so urgent, and then just a little bit of relief, your body finally is able to react. Because normally with stress, we're in the fight or flight mode. So when you need to and you feel it's urgent, I have to do it, you have this adrenaline rush. However, this adrenaline rush is affecting your body greatly, and you don't realize it until afterwards.
So time does not allow us to do justice to this topic because this is almost a separate topic, but because it is the sort of end reaction to severe work-related stress, we have to mention it. We are obliged to mention burnout. But this needs a whole...
And we also want you to, we want to be in the preventative mode of, we want you to be aware of this. So if you see, or you yourself or anyone you know, starting to slide down the scale, to come to myself or to medical as soon as possible and just to ask questions or just to figure out what's going on rather than going so far down.
That's right. So the difference between acute stress and burnout is that burnout is a long-term problem and it takes months, When you have an acute stress problem or you have just a normal work-related stress and you get ill from it, within a few weeks, and that's why the average work loss is about 25. So anything between 1 week and 4 weeks is enough to recover. Sometimes even just 3 days of work, people recover. But burnout, that's different. That takes months for people to recover from. And then we should be aware of the warning signs in ourselves and in our colleagues. So sometimes people don't realize that they are sliding into this state until sort of the last straw happens and they break through illness. And they just are not able to function. So a person in an actual state of burnout is a word that we use quite often, but sometimes people are not really having burnout when they say they are having burnout. But technically, the clinical burnout, people cannot function anymore, neither at home nor at work. So that's the difference there. And we will not go through this, but I've got it on your presentation, so you can go through that. And this is sort of the typical sample that leads to burnout. And it takes anything from several months to up to 2 to 3 years for burnout to develop when the conditions are there conducive to the development of burnout. And these are some of the important signs of or symptoms or indications of burnout. feeling tired all the time. We all feel tired from time to time, but when a person is feeling tired all of the time, without any physical illness, so they're not having anemia, they're not having any other physical illness, but they just feel tired all the time. And then they just become gradually disillusioned and they're disappointed, and they just, they have this awful sense of hopelessness all the time. They become very negative, their personality changes. And they also feel very weak, and then they begin to, the changes happen in their mind. They begin not to trust themselves anymore. They lose their confidence, they lose their ability. These are some of the things that happen. And then quite often you have this reaction, which we had, I think we had it, a week or two ago, someone who came, in a really awful state to the medical service. Said, I was shocked at myself how I reacted to my supervisor. That's not me. And was shouting. And I just never shouted at anybody. But this has been developing over the last few months. And so this person has to be off work now for several months in order to recover. And that's generally the sort of final story action that brings everything into the open and brings it to our attention. And that's why we want you to be aware, so that if you recognize any of these signs or symptoms in yourself or in your colleague, you could approach them and help them or bring it to our notice. Sometimes you can actually notify us confidentially. Very sorry. Very sorry. You can notify us confidentially if you don't want the person to know. If somebody you can say to, please, I've noticed that this and this is happening to you. Maybe you should go to the medical service or go to the staff counselor or go to your doctor. If the conditions are not right for you to do that, then you can bring it to our notice and say, look, I'm concerned about my colleague so and so, and then we will do the next step.
Because so often what happens is we don't see the cases until they're extreme.
Yeah,
and whenever you're starting to have physical symptoms because of stress, you really have gone too far down the road of stress. And it's so much easier to help you at the earlier stages. And it's so much easier for you to recover and just feel good again.
So there are also signs of stress in a group. For those of you who work with teams and so on, one of the signs that there is too much stress is when you have a lot of problems, when people are not getting on well together. Sometimes it's more than just personality differences, because we are all mature enough to deal with differences in personality in our colleagues. But when you have problems, when you have too much complaint and so on, and then several members of the group are being affected by stress, and so on, and more people are calling in sick, so that sometimes we have half or less of the team actually present, then there is a problem in that group. And then in the whole organization, there are also a number of signs that have been identified as symptoms of too much stress in that organization, and something needs to be done. If you have any of these, if you have really too many people presenting with burnout, if you have very high absenteeism, and what is now being called as presenteeism, which is people being at work but not actually being able to perform. They're just there. They're there because they are probably afraid of taking off sick, or they're there but they cannot. They just cannot function. They slow down and they are not performing very well, and that can be a vicious circle, because they're not performing well. They get talked to for that, and then they react again with stress. So you go into a vicious circle.
Because they're here for so many hours. Yes. You say, oh, look, on their time clock, they've been here for 12 hours, but they really accomplished nothing. And that's something, as a manager, you have to pay attention to.
That's right. So who is supposed to deal with stress? When you have, you've gone through the signs and symptoms of stress in us as individuals, in a group, in organization, and so on. So who is supposed to deal with it? It's actually the responsibility of everybody, including we ourselves, the staff, our supervisors, the management, the policy makers, the health services, the occupational services, and the staff counselor and the staff council. So it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody has to do their role to deal with stress in any organization. And we can actually do something about it. And for anybody in a managerial position, or supervisory, I should say, this manager and supervisor as well, your role is to just be understanding, be supportive, and have some flexibility. portfolio. Some managers are very inflexible, and it's one of the things that worsens stress in their staff. And then for us, we have to also take into account a couple of things. We have to be sure that we know we don't take on too much. Sometimes I find that very hard-working people who can achieve, who accomplish things, tend to be driven into a state of stress and burnout because they get more and more piled onto them until their limits are exceeded. Because there's only so many hours in a day and there's only so much you can do. And if as a supervisor you have 2, 3 staff doing similar jobs, and you know this one always gets the job done and on time, and this one doesn't, it's natural, it's human to pile the job more on this person who is efficient. And then they also may not be able to say no, because that's just not their nature. And so eventually you find them staying longer and longer, with more and more, and then getting eventually the mistake from that. And then, we have to just be sure we say, okay, this is the limit, I cannot do this. And we've seen a lot of people who have been driven to ill health because of a particular problem. So on the whole, managing stress is about each one of us, whatever our position, whether we are the employee or the supervisor, actually taking charge of the situation and bringing things under control and getting this balance with our life. Sometimes work takes over a person's life, and that is one of the first symptoms, and that is also quite dangerous. When there's hardly anything in your life except work, that's already dangerous. When you find that you just come to work and just go home to find somewhere to sleep and a bite to eat and come the following day, that is not good. So some people even come on Saturdays and Sundays. So there has to be time for other things. And then the resilience to put up under pressure. And this is something that is becoming increasingly important because nobody can live a completely stress-free life. And therefore, it's very important to have the resilience to hold it up. And Mr. Brown would be a few more words.
Yeah, we were just thinking that maybe later on, February or March, that we wanted to do a follow-up and build on resilience, because the idea of stress management is no longer, let's say, in vogue, because we found out, okay, there's stress and there's so many things that you can't manage. Because you can't control your boss, you can't control the workload, sometimes those kind of things, but it's about building up your resilience and learning how to say no, learning how to limit things. And so we want to do a follow-up on this like February or March and work on resilience, because there are some things in our own personalities, our own characters, our own abilities that we can build up within ourselves.
So preventing stress is a very, very big topic, and it's also the responsibility of everybody. But in general, it's very important to not only prevent it from happening in the first place, which we cannot always do, because sometimes it only comes to our attention when it is already there, but if it's already there, we have to prevent deterioration. And that's why it's very important to know what the symptoms of stress are, to know the effect, to recognize it in yourself and in other people. Do whatever you can. Bring it to our notice. If you don't want to come to us, go to your doctor or seek other help outside. And then for those of us who are in managerial or supervisory positions, do help those who should be psychologically healthy. Everybody has to do their bit to foster a psychologically healthy workplace, and that would allow employees to deal with whatever is on their plate. So the workload, the challenges, the changes, everything can be dealt with in the environment right. So for managers or supervisors, respect is very important. Everybody likes to be respected, or like to have some respect, even small children. If you want your children to be responsible and to learn respect, you have to respect them, much less your colleagues or co-workers, regardless of their rank. And handling things respectfully and responsibly, and also managing your own emotions as a supervisor or as a manager, is very important. You have to have that extra control. And then the usual good management skills are also very important in preventing
stress, because you don't